Hey team! So we've spent the last few weeks talking about the minutiae of cellular life, from molecular genetics and DNA replication through transcription, translation, central dogma of biology. And we're going to zoom out a little bit to talk about how cells grow and divide. So we're going to be beginning to explore the cell cycle, and hopefully today in class we got to the point where we took out the microscopes and looked for evidence of cell division. So you should know that the cell cycle is very important. All cells go through it. Every cell in your body either has gone through it or is going through it currently. And free-living cells also go through it. By free-living, I mean single-cell organisms also go through it as well. So it's a really important thing to know and understand. And as I said, it is a cycle, so there's really no beginning or ending, but I'm going to impose one on it so we can kind of talk about it from a starting point. Okay, so let's go to a new page here, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to start with a circle, kind of like a clock face, and pick one point along the clock and give it a green line here. So this asterisk here and green line represents the G1 phase. G stands for growth or gap. That looks like a D, but it's a P. You'll hear it called either the growth or the gap phase. You can use either one. The next part of the cell cycle is the S phase, and this stands for synthesis. And during this phase, DNA replication is occurring. The next part of the phase, I'm going to give it a red arrow right here, is called the G2 phase. And again, it's a second growth or gap phase. And the last part of the cell cycle is the M phase. Now, I'm not going to tell you yet why it's called M. You might already know, but I'm going to get into that in a little bit. Okay, so let's go back to G1, the growth or the gap phase. During this part of the cell cycle, a cell does all the normal things that it does during its cellular life. So, of course, cellular respiration is happening. During this phase, so the cell is converting chemical energy to useful cellular energy. If you're a plant cell, you're undergoing photosynthesis. Additionally, protein synthesis is happening, the process we just finished talking about. And even going back to the very beginning of the year, membrane transport, so endocytosis, exocytosis, pinocytosis, phagocytosis, the cell bringing things in and out of its membrane is happening during this first growth phase. And also, as its name implies, during this whole part of the cycle, this phase, G1, the cell is growing in size. And as you might remember from the middle, I think it was the middle of the fall term, we did a lab exploring surface area to volume ratio. And we talked about why it was important for a cell to have a high surface area to volume ratio. And this was the lab where we had the gelatin and we put it in the liquid, it turned pink, and we watched the rate of diffusion through the cell. And we saw that as cells got bigger and bigger and bigger, the diffusion rate remained the same, but the area through which, or the distance through which, diffusion had to happen to get to the core of the cell, or the nucleus of the cell, got bigger. And so a cell couldn't move in enough things within enough time in order to fuel itself. So as a cell grows and grows in size, this surface area to volume ratio actually goes down because surface area is increasing by a square and volume is increasing cubically. So we want to keep this really high surface area to volume ratio, but as the cell grows in size, the surface area to volume ratio starts to drop, and that is bad for the cell. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, moving on to the S phase. This is where DNA replication happens. You already know all about DNA replication, so I'm not going to go over it again for you here from your stop action videos. You guys are pretty well acquainted with that phase, but know that this synthesis phase is very important. The DNA of a cell is the blueprints for the cell, and so copying that DNA is a necessary step before a cell can divide. Okay, moving on. G2 phase, the same exact things happen in G1 as G2. So again, ooh, that's not what I meant to do. I want to select this and copy it. So the cell's growing in size, there's cellular respiration happening, photosynthesis, protein synthesis, membrane transport, all the same, all the normal day-to-day activities of the cell are happening in the G2 phase, and it's growing. Okay, the last phase of the cell is the M phase of the cell cycle, is the M phase. And this is where cellular division occurs. And as you guys might know, this M stands for mitosis. But it's actually kind of silly to call this the M phase because cell division consists of two parts. It's actually equal to mitosis as well as cytokinesis. Mitosis is the process of splitting the membrane, the nuclear, the process of splitting the nucleus is mitosis. So dividing up everything that resides within the nucleus is the job of mitosis. Cytokinesis is splitting up everything else in the cell, the cytoplasm, the organelles, and all that is very important too. So know that cell division is not solely consistent of mitosis. There's cytokinesis is also a really important part of this process. So we're going to be exploring over these next few days the process of mitosis and cytokinesis, and so I'm not going to tell you very much about them right now, except for the fact that mitosis and dividing the cell reasserts this high surface area to volume ratio that the cell needs in order to survive and do this membrane transport, bring things in and out of the cell. It also allows the cell to grow, and it also replaces old cells in a body that have either been damaged or destroyed in one way. Okay, I'm going to add one more arrow to this diagram here, and that starts right here. Actually, I'm going to move it down slightly. So not all cells, after they go into mitosis, enter the G1 phase. Some of them go into this phase that we call G0 or G0. And if a cell goes into G0, it exits the cell cycle. And it is never going to go through DNA replication or mitosis. It might grow more, but it's never going to divide again. And so, for example, neurons are an example of this. This is the reason why, for example, spinal cord injuries can be so devastating, because some of those neurons are never going to grow again. They can't be replaced if they're destroyed, because these cells, these neuronal cells, have exited this normal cell cycle and instead entered G0. Okay, actually, I lied. One more thing that you need to know or put into your diagram. So, starting at G1 and going all the way up to, let's erase, undo. So starting G1, going all the way up to the end of G2, this part, this whole process, G1, S, and G2, is called interphase. And this takes up most of the cell's lifetime. So most of the life of the cell is spent here in interphase, growing, doing normal cell stuff, replicating its DNA, that whole shindig. And overall, this whole process is called the cell cycle. Okay, that is it. See you tomorrow. Looking forward to doing more microscope with you all, more microscope work with you all. Okay, ciao.